Oftentimes, people from this mindset function in a place where they think changing labels or belonging to different groups will solve their problem or give them the solidity that they need. But oftentimes, this can just be a real temporary fix, and meanwhile, the real issue can go unsolved. Meaning that they replace internal cohesion, basic personal integrity, basic personal responsibility with a false sense of belonging to a group or a false sense of, oh, I'm this label, or now I subscribe to this ism, so now I have meaning. Of people get involved in isms and subscribe to ideologies, but they don't actually learn the history of it or learn where it came from or learn who created it or ask if it's ever led to any of the outcomes that they think that it will. Same thing, what I've been saying earlier about pop spirituality and all the coping mechanisms is, has anyone ever asked, where does it come from? And are people going through it actually producing the results that they think they should be producing? Or is it just creating more problems? Like maybe. And I think this is more or less why identity politics, pop spirituality, talk therapy, social media, dating apps, and many other things are so popular, and not just popular, but like absolutely necessary, absolutely part and parcel of whatever identity they have or whatever identity they're working with, part and parcel to whatever lifestyle they have, really goes together. And you would think if you have all of these tools, if you have all of these coping mechanisms, you have all of these strategies, you would actually feel better, have solidity, have cohesion, have harmony. But that's actually not the case. Like, for a great example of this is a great deal of the therapeutic world has been around for a while. And also since the 60s, let's say, like spirituality has been popular in America, and it's supposed to help all the people, help all these people and solve all these problems. So then, okay, what, 50, 60 years later, we have more problems, more mental health issues, more emotional issues, lower physical health markers across the board, more societal instability. Basically, every measurable metric of things that those things should have improved, they haven't. So at what point are people going to realize, oh, maybe something is off there? It's like, how much time and energy are we going to pour into identity politics, pop spirituality, talk therapy, social media, dating apps, and then all the other things that I mentioned before in terms of coping mechanisms? And then people continually feel worse, get more unstable, get more confrontational, get more on edge, get more agitated, and then still subscribe to those things, even though they're creating more of a negative outcome. Like personally, I can think of at least a dozen people that I met who swear by pop spirituality and talk therapy and identity politics. They're just, it saved them. It gave them so much meaning and purpose, and they got over all these issues, and their life is just, they've arrived at the promised land. But when I actually meet them and talk to them, they're agitated, they're irritable, they're anxious, they require a ton of coping mechanisms just to survive. And the slightest little thing sets them off. The slightest little thing ruins their day, ruins their week, ruins their month. And I'm thinking, okay, those are obviously not achieving any of the outcomes that I think anyone would say as positive. So I don't think they've actually done the things that you think they've done. Things just created more confusion and more instability. And I think basically it's illustrating a profound level of hypocrisy and a profound level of personal contradiction and a deep lack of personal integrity and a deep lack of any degree of self-reflection. And I think a couple great examples I can give you to illustrate the profound level of hypocrisy and contradiction and confusion is the gaining popularity of anti-capitalist sentiment and support for things like communism and socialism within these demographics. And this isn't a political video, and I'm not trying to be like a political commentator. I'm just going to use this as an example because historical facts are pretty easily to verify, and it's things that are pretty widely known, but for some reason not that widely known for that many people in America, which again is another great example of people get involved in isms and subscribe to ideologies, but they don't actually learn the history of it or learn where it came from or learn who created it or ask if it's ever led to any of the outcomes that they think that it will. Same thing, what I've been saying earlier about pop spirituality and all the coping mechanisms is, has anyone ever asked, where does it come from? And are people going through it actually producing the results that they think they should be producing? Or is it just creating more problems? Like maybe just ask basic fundamental questions that take just a few minutes for investing our whole identity into it. So more or less, people that get really involved in these anti-capitalist, pro-communist, pro-socialist things are more or less saying that the most tragic, worst parts of human history are actually the true path to equality. They're basically saying that dependence is freedom and homogeny is diversity. And what I mean by that is pretty much by saying that communism and socialism are the solution and the true path to true equality is basically ignoring the historical facts that these things have led to the greatest tragedies and inequalities that humanity has ever seen. Cultural revolution in China, communism, great example. The revolution in Cambodia that killed millions of people and killed a huge chunk of their population in only a few years was under the banner of agrarian socialism. Another great example. Cultural Nazi Germany is another great example, which was nationalist socialism. And then Russia under Stalin, communism. So these here I've just listed in like less than a minute, I guess 4 examples where communism and socialism flags were flown and those ideologies were put into play, where millions and millions and millions of people died brutally, horribly, in some of the worst conditions. Genocides were enacted, racial discrimination, gender discrimination, ethnic cleansing, like the worst aspects of humanity, the worst things that people can do to each other, were done under these flags, were done under these isms, and in some instances are still being done and are still happening right now under these isms. But then you have like Gen Z millennial people saying like, oh, anti-capitalism, and I'm a communist, I'm a socialist. And I can't tell you how many people I've seen on their social media, on their dating profile, on their bumper sticker, on their car, on their tattoos, on their clothes, in any way they can let the world know are saying these things. And I'm wondering, like, have you looked at the history? Like, literally, the one of the mayoral candidates for Portland wore a dress with Stalin, Lenin, Mao Zedong, Che Guevara, Pol Pot, and a bunch of other communist people. And I'm like, well, wait, Che Guevara was like openly anti-gay, as was Fidel Castro. Not to mention all the other things that all these other communist people did, but you're wearing it thinking you're all about equality and inclusion and leveling the playing field when it's like literally the exact opposite. Like you couldn't get more opposite. It's it's like saying like it's raining outside, so if I need to dry off, I'll go outside. I want to live in a warmer climate, so I'm going to move to Antarctica. That's literally what people are saying. And again, I'm not trying to do a political commentary. This isn't a defense of capitalism. We could spend hours critiquing it and pointing out all the ways it's led to bad things. Not the point of the video. The point is pointing out the massive confusion, the massive contradiction, the massive, deep, profound level of hypocrisy that someone would have to be under to publicly decree these types of things and to wear clothes and tattoos and all the other things. And it's basically like these people value, or they say they value individuality and self-discovery, but in behavior, they do things that imply that those things only come from a group identity. So the way to know my individual self is through my group identity, whether it's my gender, my race, my sexual orientation, my economic class, my nationality, or any other subdivision of those things. That's how I know my individuality. And personal freedom and self-expression are obviously things that we would value as well, but they think that comes from being fully dependent on external power structures like communism and socialism, or that personal freedom comes from being completely reliant on a governmental entity. So I realize the political thing is kind of a major left turn and a major departure from what I'm saying, and I just chose it because these types of ideas are really popular and only gaining popularity in these demographics. And it's like a really extreme example of many of the dynamics that I'm talking about. And I chose an extreme example to illustrate the point in a pretty extreme way. I could have chose many benign ones, and I think I mentioned more benign ones earlier in the video, but it's just showing what happens when basically people are functioning in a large way that is pretty consistent that with behavior of people with identity or personality disorders. So poorly defining their concepts, ideals, and outcomes, constantly moving the goalposts, lacking any personal responsibility and accountability, and having significant instability in their identity. In large in part, I think this is, at least in America, in terms of like people that are leaning towards spirituality and even politics, I think basically we just inherited the absolute worst aspects and the most self-indulgent, narcissistic aspects from the boomer generation. And I could do a whole video breaking down the whole evolution of ideas and etymology that we commonly know now as pop spirituality and even therapy, and trace that all the way back and see all of the flaws and all of the missteps and all of the errors that occurred at each step.